What's going on, everybody? Canuck here, and we've got another episode of Course Design 101. And today we are finally going to address the most requested topic that I have had in my YouTube comments and on my streams. It's how the heck do I use the water tool? And there's been a reason why I've avoided talking about this, is because the water tool is sort of broken right now. It's not quite working as intended. I have had some time in the last couple days to really fiddle with it and try to figure out what exactly it's doing. And I've come up with a couple workarounds and ways to get the tool actually behaving properly so you can lay down some basic ponds, even some basic streams. So I'm going to talk about how to lay down those lakes, those ponds, and we're also going to talk about the running water feature and just some ways that you can use this to at least try to get this water looking as best as it possibly can. So you are probably here because maybe on your plot, you're like, hey, I want to make a lake. Let's ignore it. We're going to talk about these lakes in a second because those aren't quite the lakes that we're going to create, but we'll talk about why those are there in a sec. But let's say you're like, oh, I want to create a lake. And then you go, okay, here's my create water tool. And I'm going to go down to create water body. And here you're going to spline it just like you would kind of like a fairway. And it naturally makes like a bit of a circular a path, not really circular, but a filled in path. And you look and then you get oh, mine's doing weird things, but that's probably because it's super flat. And you're wondering, well, what the heck is going on here? I don't know how to work with this. Well, what we used to have in the old game were we used to lay down water with like what were called water planes. So what we would do is we would kind of sculpt the land around the pond first, and then we would kind of stick in our square water plane and sculpt around it. So what I'm actually going to show you how to do is kind of a couple methods of kind of how to do this with these new splines to kind of make it like it was in 2K23. So in order to make a pond, you can't just find a flat piece of land and just throw down a spline. Okay, you're going to have to do some pre-sculpting first. So we're going to start with ponds. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just for ease sake, I'm going to make a relatively simple pond. And let's just, we can have a general idea of one. We're just going to use our fuzzy brush. We're going to drop this down a little bit here. We don't really have to worry too much. Just make some sort of like a depression. Okay, don't worry if water starts showing up at the bottom. That means you've hit what's called the water table. So all of these lakes down at the bottom have hit what's called the water table. And you can make a lake like this if you want to, if you're using a relatively flat piece of land. If you go down far enough, you will hit water. And if you're using that, then you can just use the water table to make lakes, and it's really nice and easy. However, I'm sure a lot of you are going to be a lot higher up and wondering, well, how do I make lakes without making a giant pit? So what you're going to do is you're going to do some pre-sculpting here. Okay. And then once you've got that pre-sculpted, I'm going to show you a couple different ways of doing this. Way number one is you're going to go into your water tool, create water body, and you're going to kind of go around maybe the edge here. And you're going to draw a relatively simple shape following that little depression that you made as best you can. Okay, we're going to talk about spline points here in a second and why fewer is better. So let's say we lay down that, but unfortunately you're still not quite getting what you want because your sea of the water plane is kind of floating here. This isn't great. And then but the nice thing about the splines is you can adjust certain things in the edit menu. However, a lot of these right now aren't really working. Like for example, if I change like the fill depth, it doesn't do anything. The water edge height doesn't really do anything. Disable terrain effects. I did figure out how this works, but we don't need to cover this in this video. Surface effects, the only thing that kind of does work, and you see how it's kind of created this brownish effect. If I don't want that, I can disable the surface effects, and then I can just have green around it. Okay, but we want to cover kind of how to essentially make this flat so it's not a floating plane. So you can achieve this in a couple ways. Now, way number one is you can sculpt around it. So I'm going to use my fuzzy brush and basically just kind of tuck in the spline. So we can do it this way. And as you can see here, as we're working our way around, okay, and still it is a little bit close to the surface, so I might even want to raise it up a little bit more. Just like that. And I'm going to go around, do this, and I really need to make sure that I don't have any floating blind points sticking out anywhere. You're going to go around and do that. Doing this very quick for tutorial sake. This is gets a little bit deeper here. There we go. Oop, that's not very good. So we'll, whoops. Again, this does become a little bit tedious, and this is why, well, water isn't working that great right now. So you can eventually go around and flatten out these humps and bumps, but eventually you're going to get to a point where you do have your lake completely enclosed. Now, another way you could do this is you can just extend out the spline a little bit more. So like if I wanted to tuck it in a little bit more, maybe I did have a bit of a floating edge. Actually, let's try to show that off. Just going to undo it here. Well, so let's say we have it here, and maybe you have a hill already that's kind of up here, or something like a little bit of a higher mark here, like that. And what you can do is just take one of the edges of your splines, try to pick a point, not a handle, and we're just going to click and drag. Whoops. To the point, and then you can kind of just tuck it in to the side. And then as you've tucked it in, so the actual point is way over here, but it's kind of gone into the terrain. So now you have it. Again, we still have some floating stuff here, which I would fix. Again, you can sculpt rather close around it and just make sure it's all brought in. And there you go. So now this still would need some work. I'd kind of go around and flatten some things, but there is a rather functional lake. So that's one way you can do it. Another way, which I've actually found to maybe even be easier than that, is we're going to do the same thing. You still do have to pre-sculpt. What we're going to do. So we're just going to pre-sculpt a little lake here. Like a depression there. Maybe I'll make it a little bit deeper, just so it's a bit easier. Kind of the deeper you make it, the easier it is. Okay. And but again, we want it to be kind of right on the edge here. So what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to create water, but I'm actually going to make this water body a little bit bigger than the actual depression that I made. But a really important point here, do you see how right now my water spline for some reason is raised up 5.86 yards? I don't know why. Make sure you click down on the right stick so it's set back down to 0. Because if you do, you're going to put a water plane that's up like 6 yards, and it's going to, well, I'll actually show you what'll happen here. So if I actually accidentally did this, you get... Oh, it actually didn't do it that time. This is how bugged this thing is. But anyway, it does make it quite a bit higher up, which we don't want. So just for ease sake, we're going to make our water plane, water body. Make sure you have it at 0. So I'm going to make it, again, a little bit bigger than it needs to be. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually lower the spline. As you can see, it's a lot bigger than it needs to be, but it is kind of floating, and I don't want it to be this big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spline, to pick a point, and I'm going to go to move, and I'm going to move the whole spline. And now this is a little bit tricky, because now you've got this floating spline here in terms of like how exactly high it is. As you make it go up or down, you will kind of start to see it drop down a bit. You do have to just kind of fiddle with this. So if I dropped it down, see, I've dropped it down a little bit too much maybe there. So maybe I'm going to move the spline up a little bit. And there I've made it a little bit too wide again. Bring the point down. It takes some fiddling. Actually, I had it pretty good there. And then what I would do is, if I wanted to make it bigger, because this spline is plenty big, I now can just do some lowering, and I can make my spline a little bit bigger, and I will have a nice lake, and I won't have to worry about any weird edges or anything like that. So that is how I would make water bodies now. And again, you can, this one is, I believe, a little bit higher than this one. Yeah, it's about 3 feet higher. So yeah, which is kind of nice. All right, before we move on to streams, I do want to just quickly mention spline points with ponds, because they actually do take up a lot of meter for some weird reason. So just to kind of compare here, and I want to keep your eye on that object meter, okay? And this is why we want to use as few as possible. So if I wanted to just create a water body here, so if I just use a few points, you know, something like that, okay, that only used about I think 1 object meter. But if I made a tinier pond even, water body, but I use like a ton of spline points, look at that object meter. It goes up really, 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 really fast. Okay, so you do have to be very careful. The fewer, the better spline points for sure. Okay. Let's now talk about running water, which is a giant pain in the butt right now. So what I want to do here for creating a stream. Now I'm using a very flat piece of land, and I suggest you use kind of make it as flat as possible, the area around where you're going to put the stream. It just makes it easier. You can go back and sculpt later to your heart's content. But to actually lay down a stream, this is kind of what I found to be the easiest thing so far. So again, you're going to have to pre-sculpt. If you just lay down a running water, okay, you're just going to get a floating line, okay? And it's a pain in the butt to work with. So what you need to do is you need to pre-sculpt. So we're going to use our landscape tool. I'm going to go to landscape raise. I'm going to actually use a bit of a sharper brush this time to make more of a defined edge. I'm going to do it around here. I'm going to drop it down a few feet, maybe 3 feet, and I'm going to just click and hold. I'm clicking the A button and holding. Yes, it is making those little weird depressions. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's just make a short one for now, something like that. And now when I create a water body around, sorry, not a water body, when I create running water, as long as I follow the stream, actually I'm going to like this. Okay, so see, now I have it kind of following, but it's really bumpy, right? And it's because it's literally following the land. So the sculpting that you made, all those little bumps, it's going up and down, up and down, up and down. You don't want a stream that's going to look like that. So here's annoyingly where it's going to have to, you're going to have to take some time and really sculpt some things out. So I'm going to actually delete the spline for now. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to remove this. So I'm going to go my landscape, flatten, I'm going to use my old fuzzy brush, and we're just going to kind of go back and forth and just kind of smooth the thing out. This can be a little bit time consuming. Very time consuming. This will take a little bit of time to do, but you want to make it as flat as possible. The flatter you make it, the better it's going to look. Okay. Now I've actually gone ahead because it took me a few minutes. I got it to a relatively flat point like this. Okay. So now when I go and lay down my water, it should look, just as long as I follow my little path, it should look relatively smooth like that. Okay, now it is still floating a little bit, but right now what we're going to do is we're just going to make this spline a little bit wider so we can tuck it in. We're going to make the path width a little bit wider like that. Okay, and again, we have those surface effects, which I do want to get rid of in this case. There we go. Okay, and yeah, it's a little bit, it's not perfectly, level, but I mean, most streams aren't. Okay, and it is following it pretty well. There's very minimal bumps. And if you do want to start bringing this downhill now, just as long as you use, or let's do that, it will start to follow the land if I bring it down quite a bit. Okay, so as you can see now, it is starting to flow downhill. Okay, actually, we should talk about actual flow of the water, because the water's not actually moving right now. So you can actually change this. Okay, if you change, you can change the flow speed. So the higher you make it, the faster the water will flow. And then you just kind of got to fiddle around with the direction. The direction's kind of numerical, which is a little bit silly. So you just kind of got to find where... I believe these used to be like compass headings, but they took the compass away, so it's a little tricky. There we go. Now it's kind of starting to flow downhill. There we go. And there is your stream, or a little one for now. So that's ponds and that's streams. They're, you know, again, a bit of a pain to work with. One more quick thing I do want to show you is just some water features. Okay, these are pretty similar to 2K23, but for those that want to make things like waterfalls, I don't recommend making a billion waterfalls, but you can. Here's the high falls. You can bring these up and down. Okay, you can also advanced edit them to make them skinny and fat and short and long. Yeah, waterfalls. They're fun, but I know newer designers love waterfalls, but restrain yourself a bit. But they can be fun. And then maybe at the bottom, you might want to make like a high splash. So here you're just kind of playing with raising them up and down. Okay, and you can kind of create maybe like a waterfall splash at the bottom. It's kind of cool. And then you've got lower falls, which I think this is bugged. It's creating like a shadow for some reason. So I guess just as long as you have this behind like a rock or something, it's relatively fine to use. But yeah, the low falls are a little bit bugged with this shadow right now. And then we've got low splash, which I don't really think you can see that well, as long as you put it kind of right on top of the water. You can kind of see a little bit. And then you have the ripples, which don't really do much. I can't even see them. They're there somewhere. Yeah, they're not even visible. So anyway, those are water features. All right, guys, I hope this helped a little bit, and I may revisit this tutorial again, but for now, you know, if you follow these steps, you can actually create some decent water bodies. This took me a while to figure out. But yeah, go around, play with it, be patient with it, and I'm hopeful that HB is going to come up with a fix very soon. So thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this helped, and we'll see you next time.